This is Jordan Edwards, and this is the Business Jiu Jitsu Podcast.
Good afternoon, and welcome back to the podcast. Jarrell Garcia, black belt extraordinaire, and we lost you out there to Pennsylvania and California, but now you're officially back on the East Coast.
I'm back on the podcast. I'm back on the East Coast.
Back on the podcast. Great to have you back on the podcast and back on the East Coast. So how's everything been going since we last caught up with you?
It's been awesome. Once again, especially being back on the East. Been back out here since August 1st when we flew back out here. And I don't remember if I was officially Dr. Garcia last time we chatted, but yeah, so back on the East Coast, in Rhode Island. Never lived in the New England area, but honestly, it's been going even better than I could have ever imagined.
I'm so happy to hear that. Yeah, I know last time we spoke, I think you had just gotten your doctorate, but you hadn't yet made the move, although I think you were planning on making the move over to University of Rhode Island. Am I correct?
Yep. Yeah. You or I now.
Let me share my screen for a second. And for those that haven't listened to the last podcast together, here I have your bio pulled up, but Jarrell Garcia, born and raised in Northeast Brooklyn, and also living out in the Pocono Mountains in Pennsylvania. Dr. Garcia is a native of East Coaster who has literally worked from coast to coast, committed to promoting the value of research, not being limited to the publication of its words, but rather the impact it has on the world around us. Dr. Garcia has over a decade of experience with higher education, having worked at some of the top public institutions in the country, UC Berkeley, UCLA, and UC Santa Barbara. He has honed his application of leadership theory, organizational and personal management, and strategic planning in the field and through the work on nationally recognized committees with the belief and a proven application of professional development through a wellness and well-being lens. He has come to URI as the current Associate Director of Campus Recreation and a great addition to the Alan Sean Feinstein College of Education and Professional Studies. Dr. Garcia's research centers around the development and application of transferable life skills across disciplines, fields, for example, sports and non-sport related careers, applying quantitative methodologies to a predominantly qualitative topic. He critically confronts the positive and negative biases that exist within sports leadership and professional development. As for his involvement with the field of higher education, Dr. Garcia has presented at numerous conferences, currently serves as the chair of the NIRSA Leaders in Collegiate Recreation Research and Assessment Board, and will hold a seat on the URI Mental Health JED Task Force. He has his Doctorate of Education, his MS of Sports Management, and his BS of Sports Administration from Drexel, East Stroudsburg, and Lock Haven, respectively. And of course, and I'm adding this in, Jarrell is a 10th planet black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Wow.
That sounds impressive.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking
that sounds so impressive.
What a phenomenal career track. And I know you're just getting started,
Sure.
but you have put in the years, decade plus of work, education, schooling, research, and you've been, sharpening the saw, as they say.
Yeah.
Welcome back.
Yeah, no, it's awesome, man. What an introduction.
I'll be your hype man anytime.
Oh, I love it.
So maybe before we jump into the new kind of stuff, just give us a little reminder on how you got started in jiu-jitsu.
For sure. So I played soccer my whole entire life, and then went off to college, Lock Haven University. Wasn't playing soccer anymore, and I have an older brother who's in the military, Army. And when he came to visit, we did what most siblings do, which was fight and wrestle. And he had gotten me into a rear naked choke, and he's like, "I'm going to put you to sleep." And I was like, "That's not real." So then he put me to sleep. And I was like, "What? Oh my goodness." So I think that was around 2008, 2009. So I went back to Lock Haven. They had an MMA gym there. So I was starting off doing MMA training, but really gravitated towards the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu aspect. So after about a year and a half of training MMA, I purely focused on jiu-jitsu. So after that, I started driving 45 minutes 3 times a week to Penn State in central Pennsylvania to train jiu-jitsu. So that was in 2010, strictly focusing on Brazilian jiu-jitsu. And then I met, between that time, I didn't graduate until 2012. So I was just bouncing between gyms every time I'd go home. And then a 10 Planet opened up in about 2012, 2013. 10 Planet Allentown opened up with Jam Holland and Zach Maslany.
Yeah.
So in 2013, yep. Yeah. I love Zach. Literally was the officiant at my wedding. Fun fact.
Wow.
And so
he does it all, this guy. He promotes tournaments. He runs gyms. He manages fighters. He referees Rise Invitational. He officiates weddings. I mean, come on. It's unbelievable what this guy can do. Is there anything that guy can't do?
Modern day Renaissance, man. That's the path we're on. So I like stopped by the gym before leaving for LA, and I was like, I'm gonna be back. And they're like, sure. We hear that all the time. And I went, did a quick LA trip, came back, and have been with 10 Planet ever since 2013. So yeah, this week, holy crap. I just noticed today marks 10 years purely focusing on jiu-jitsu.
Wow. That's incredible.
With 10 Planet, 13 years total of training jiu-jitsu. So 13 years total, but 10 years specifically with 10 Planet.
Wow, that's phenomenal.
Yeah.
Where did you get your black belt? Was it in Pennsylvania or in California?
In Pennsylvania, yeah. So I came back home during the pandemic. Came back home and was dropping by Bethlehem, and the story that I now know was Eddie was asking around like, so is Jarrell a black belt yet? They were like, no, the pandemic and everything. So it was funny hearing the story after the fact. So they're like, hey, he's coming home. Like he's been with Bethlehem since 2013. Every time he would come back home, he'd always been with us. So we'd love to give him his black belt. So yeah, back in 2020 is when I got my black belt.
So I have a question to frame this conversation, but I don't want you to answer it just yet. I want you to first tell us all about your new role, and you've had a lot of advanced thinking. But the question that I want to get to is how your study of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu has been influencing your work, on the college campus through the lens of recreation, through the lens of sport, helping people, working. So before you get to that question, I would love if you could just give us a little deep dive into what it is that you're doing right now.
For sure. So I kind of have two roles on the University of Rhode Island campus. I'm the associate director of campus recreation. So I oversee the entire department underneath the director. So campus recreation includes the general recreation and gyms that you see on any college campus. So the oversight of those facilities, but that also includes aquatic programming, intramural sports, club sports. So we have over 20 club sport teams, group fitness classes, wellness initiatives, a marketing department. So I think all in all, we have about 350 student employees. I think about 12 professional employees. So I'm in charge of all those components there, and the strategic planning and budgeting of all that. Not on the day-to-day basis, but how are we going to make sure we're sustainable over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, and planning on all that. So when I'm not doing that, I'm also a professor within the College of Education. So I teach at the grad level, research classes, and leadership courses as well. So that's my current role, which, coming from California, I was working at University of California, Santa Barbara. My staff is actually smaller than it would have been if I stayed there. But honestly, that's what I wanted. I wanted a smaller institution because I knew I was going to be starting to teach. And teaching 300 plus students, there's no way I can have that direct one-on-one impact, contact, or be able to best serve them. So I was actually looking to go to a smaller institution where I know I'd be able to make an actual direct and personal impact. So I actually it's not as stressful as it was in the other school, even though I'm in a now higher position. That's my current what I'm got going on.
That sounds like a great fit. And I played club sports at school, club lacrosse, and I was on the ski team in college. Very competitive, club team.
Yeah.
It was great. We took it very seriously. We played in great leagues. I lasted a couple of years. And then I also had my own team. I was at a men's lacrosse team that I started. But those are really great experiences for me, and I love playing at that level. Very, very exciting.
Well, yeah, and once again, at the club level, they still have like national championship games, regional championship games, and everything. So it's definitely a big thing and awesome experience.
I remember that I went to Northeastern University in Boston, and I remember there was a jiu-jitsu room. They practice in the wrestling room of the student center, but I never once did it. I always was like, I should go try that. I should go do it. And I never did it until I graduated and came back to New York. But I wonder, is there a jiu-jitsu program at URI?
There is a club that's not directly overseen by our department.
Yeah.
So, but that's my biggest thing has been first, I want to make sure that I get to learn my staff, right, and what their goals are. And I kind of have a thought process on that. But then I'm going, right, where are we going? Both as each one of our individual programmers, but us as a department. But that's definitely one of my biases is, so do we have the space to do this? So definitely personal bias and my jiu-jitsu influence does sway some of my conversations.
I mean, can you imagine the resource that these college kids have at their disposal right now, that they have a 10th planet black belt right on campus every single day? I mean, they're going to be kicking themselves. I'll tell you a quick little story. In my early years of training Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, starting back in 2009, probably from about 2009 to maybe about 2013, 14, I'm estimating, my sensei, Nardu Debra, who's a black belt under Henzo and John Danaher, would often bring his friends and training partners into the dojo. And most famously, we had a guy named Harry St. Ledger. Harry and his twin brother, Gary St. Ledger, on the Olympic judo team at the time. And they were Olympic alternates, and they were jiu-jitsu black belts, very high level wrestlers. And he would say, I'm bringing these guys to you, and all you have to do is show up to their class. And routinely, we were such a small academy that only 1 or 2 or even 3 people would come and take the judo. And one time I remember in a class with now UFC welterweight and teammate of mine, Randy Brown, Harry St. Ledger, and it was just the 3 of us training wrestling takedowns. And my sensei would always say to us, one day you're going to look back and you're going to say, I can't believe I got to train with those guys.
Yeah.
So then Harry leaves New York and he moves out to Albuquerque, New Mexico. And where does he start training? Well, he starts training at Jackson Wink. And now fast forward all these years later, and every single UFC fight, this guy's cornering somebody or someone else. He's like the most unbelievable coach. Yeah. And so I say to all of you URI students, look what you got over there.
Yeah, it's easy to just take things unknowingly take things for granted because you don't realize how much of an asset it can be or a service to your future self.
Yeah. Same thing right now with like the new wave jiu-jitsu guys in my association, and all these years of having John Danaher there.
Yeah.
And I would try, before COVID, I would try to go down at least a couple times a year. Always try to I used to take my birthday off and have a day of myself. And I lived in the city, but I went to Long Island, so I'd stay in the city and I'd go to the morning classes. And then I never expected that it would be over. And then COVID hits and it just changed everybody's life so much.
Yeah. I actually think I just recently made a post, or maybe I was just thinking about it. You don't know when it's going to be the last time you do something or experience something. Right. And it's that same thing. It's we kind of you just go about life and it's oh, that's over. Right. Or how amazing that time of that life was. But yeah, that's also what makes it so awesome when you are able to experience those things and now it's no longer there in a way.
It's I'm so happy that you brought that up because I've experienced that, and it happens so fast and you don't know it's coming. And then all of a sudden it happens. And I know you had a child. You have one, right?
Yeah. Just one little boy.
One boy. I think we had a boy, our boys, it was my second year first around the same time, about a little more than 2 years ago now.
Yep.
And you go into this parenting phase of your life and kind of the friend phase of your life. I'm not going to say it's over, but it changes where your whole life centers around your friends and your social life. And then all of a sudden now it centers around being a parent.
Bro, for sure. 100%. Like I was already not the most social person. Get me one-on-one and I could talk, but now even more so. I'm like, all right, going home, see my little guy, go to the gym, come back home for my little guy. So yeah, most definitely.
What kind of lessons have you learned being a father?
Oh, that's such a good question. And surprisingly, I haven't really thought about that. But one, I'll say I was surprised at how, and maybe this is a humble brag, but I was surprised at how easy it came to me because I didn't grow up with like a lot of kids around me or anything along those lines. So I was like, oh, how am I gonna be awkwardly, like when maybe like your wife gives you her purse, and you're like, how do I hold this thing? I thought that's how I'd be. Like, all right, how do I hold this being? But literally, as soon as he was born, it was just like automatic. So I think the biggest thing that I'll say learn or appreciate is that I'm really getting to learn the type of environment and lifestyle that my wife has through our son.
Yeah.
Right. Which has been good because once again, they kind of reflect the things you're doing, whether you're aware of it or not. Right. So they'll kind of bring to light some things like, oh, wow, I didn't notice that I talk loud, or that I use my hands when I talk, or that I sit on the edge of the couch, or that I, when I wake up in the morning, I use deodorant and ask for lotion, and now he's doing the same thing. Like these little things to big things that they will show you, or that you will learn that you do. So I guess that's probably the biggest thing is I'm learning about myself through this little mini cuter version of myself.
That's so right. Your kids, if there's a habit that you don't like about yourself and you don't even know it, they will show it to you.
Yeah.
And there's that great quote. It says like, what annoys you about other people will lead you to a better understanding of yourself. And they will show it right back to you. And my wife often says that, I work with my father, and sometimes when he gets very frustrated with me, my wife will overhear, she'll say, he's not talking to you, he's talking to himself.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you're his mirror.
Yep. Yeah, that's so funny because and a small little thing, like my wife is 5'2", so I'm literally a foot taller than my wife. I'm 6'2", so oftentimes she'll have to like climb on things to get him. And so one of my sons started doing climbing on things to grab stuff, and she's like, I don't know where he got this from. And I'm like, really? No idea? I don't think I have to climb the fridge to grab something. So I have an inkling it may be someone else in this household.
Well, you are from Canarsie, Brooklyn.
Yep.
I'll always remember that because that's where my mom is from. And my mom will often say, my mom's also 5'2", and she'll always say, and I'm 6'2", just like you. And my mom will always say, get over here, I need your height.
yeah. Literally, I would say the same
accent.
Yeah, Canarsie.
Yeah, but I'm so grateful to, number one, my sensei, but also to jiu-jitsu, because I feel like, not only in business jiu-jitsu, this podcast, but jiu-jitsu has helped me become such a better father and friend and listener, because, I always feel like I'm doing jiu-jitsu when I'm dealing with these things in life. And sometimes, you'll watch the things that kids do, and it can be an immediate cause of annoyance. Don't do that. No. And I hear my friends go after their kids, and it's like, no. And I just like think back to jiu-jitsu of like the erratic nature of like being untrained, and how jiu-jitsu is so counterintuitive to life. Someone's on top of you, you feel like you should push them off with all of your might. But as of course we know, that's the opposite of what you want to do in order to get somebody off of you. And so same thing with kids. I actually, not that I think parenting is easy, but when I heard you say that you were surprised at how easy it came to you, I feel the same way. But I acknowledge that I've learned all of this jujitsu, right? And so my sensei would always say about parenting, the kid is going to be eating the spaghetti. They pick up the spaghetti. They look at the spaghetti. They look at you. They throw the spaghetti on the floor. And you have one of two options. You could either yell at them and scream at them, no, don't do that to the spaghetti. Or you just pick up the spaghetti, throw it in the garbage, and you look at the kid and say, eat. So
exactly.
I'm often so surprised at how much I've learned about parenting and life just by attending jiu-jitsu classes.
Oh my, yeah, like, and you kind of nailed it in regards to the reacting versus responding, because the natural reaction, right, which is not as controlled, is literally just a hey, right, to which they just see a reaction, right? They're not fully processing good, bad, everything in between just yet, or as they get older, obviously they do. So it's like, oh, reaction, let me keep doing that, right? So being able to literally just like, okay, that happened, almost in slow motion, it's like, and there it goes. You're like, all right, nope, we don't do that. And they're like, oh, well, that wasn't that fun. I guess I'll move on to something else. But yeah, the one, I remember seeing a post, this is probably months ago, of parents, sometimes you'll hear parents say like, oh, parenting isn't hard. And people are like, what? These parents aren't parenting right if they don't think it's hard. And what I think when people say that, what they're getting to is we oftentimes confuse or try to use these words interchangeably of like hard and bad, right? So when people hear, or when people are like saying parenting isn't hard, they're like, no, it's not bad, because oftentimes, unfortunately, what people think is hard, they also think is bad. Right. And I was like, that's what I believe, and that's my only interpretation of what I think people are trying to say. It's like, well, no, it's not bad. It's like, well, no, it is hard, but it's not bad. But yeah, so in that case, I don't find parenting hard in the sense of it being bad, but it is challenging, right? It is difficult, but so is like a leg workout, right? And that's how I look at it. It's like, well, I planned to do this. I planned to be a parent. And I knew it was going to be challenging, difficult, need motivation, need to be disciplined at times. But that's what I signed up for, right? So that's why I like my staff, my people will never hear me complain about it, not because it's not hard, but it's because it's like me complaining about a leg workout that I chose to do. You know what I mean? Once again, comparing kids to a leg workout, but but that's how I process it. It's like, well, yeah, it's hard, but that's what I expected. I wanted it to be somewhat challenging. I expected that because I know that's also where you develop both yourself and develop them through those hard challenges, hurdles, and everything else. So
I think it's perfectly said. And it's, I also think that it's about, and I often say this to my team members at work, you're putting in hard work. And if you're getting good results, then it feels easier.
Yeah, that's probably, yeah, I'm probably fortunate
if you're putting in a lot of work and you're getting a lot of resistance, it doesn't mean you're not working hard. It just means that you might not be doing the right thing. Yeah. And so we can show up to jiu-jitsu endlessly, but if we're not accepting of the lesson, if we're not accepting of the technique, if our ego is standing in the way of being able to receive it. And before I had kids, I was reading all these baby books, so many baby books. I love the baby books. My wife and I read a bunch together. My favorite one was called Bringing Up Bébé. It was about like a French approach to parenting and how they basically, if I could summarize that book in one way, it was that you have to have a life. You have to continue to live your life, and the children are a part of your life. And I think a lot of times what I see with some parents, and this is their choice, is that they make the children
their life,
the star of the show.
Yeah.
And I think that's a lot of the times when I see it being hard, like you're describing. It's very hard.
Well, and it's very not only tempting but natural in many ways to put the baby's needs first. Makes sense, right? But then also put their wants next, and then you put your needs. So that's where you'll hear oftentimes parents like, I haven't showered in 4 days. It's like, you gotta shower.
Yes.
Or I haven't eaten, or I haven't slept, or I haven't. It's like, those are critical things for you to be able to give that child your best, right? Same thing to training. If you're not sleeping right, eating right, and a variety of other things, training will be a lot more challenging, right? And it'll be a lot more difficult for you to even learn and be able to adapt during that time if you're not doing all those other things. You know what I mean? So it's once again that holistic approach, and it's not, you need to be selfish in order to serve people. In certain capacities, because if you're completely depleted, I have nothing to give you.
That's right. And I think it's about, creating a very good foundation for yourself and keeping good balance. It's no secret that when you're trying to become good at jiu-jitsu, one of the things you're trying to do is break down their structures, take them off balance. And so, creating this, being able to do that and keep good balance for yourself in your own life and create structure in your own life that helps you become a better parent. I love these metaphors. I know that you do too, because I watch all of your videos. You do some great, we call them mat chats in my dojo. Do you have a name for what you do in your
So
content making?
I know, and I have so many people telling me to get back to it, but yeah, literally, like people would call them mat chats or jujitsu talks is ultimately what I ended up landing on.
Oh, right.
Landing.
You have a secondary project, Jiu Jitsu Talks, right?
Yeah. Well, and I was like, all right, that's probably my biggest weakness is consistency of social media because I struggle with it. I was like, all right, I'm going to do it. And I was consistent. And then I was like, all right, I'm going back to my main page. So it's like, I almost like need a person who will force me to do certain things. But yeah, so that's all we ended up calling. It's like, oh, the jiu-jitsu talks is what I ended up doing.
Yeah. So yeah, you have your jiu-jitsu talks, and in my dojo we call them mat chats.
Yep.
But
Yeah.
you took your philosophy of jiu-jitsu talks, and you've been working on not only having a perspective of jiu-jitsu, because that's one aspect of who you are, but you have a very, very, very deep bench of skills and perspectives that transcend just jiu-jitsu. And you're also a professor. And so you've begun to talk about things that are outside of jiu-jitsu also on your main page. And that's something that you were very honest to the community of people that you're talking to, people that follow you. And you said, I'm going to try something new. So tell me about it. That's when I hit you up again. I was like, let's talk about this on the podcast.
Yeah, no, honestly, I've been struggling with that for years because I'm naturally a very private person. Once again, get me one-on-one, or I consider this one-on-one. I can talk for hours, especially if we have dinner or wine. But the putting out of my life, I keep my life very compartmentalized. Right. So there are people even family members who literally thought like jiu-jitsu was my primary job. Because they saw me on social media and they're like, oh, I didn't know he was a professor and doing all this other stuff, because that's how separate I keep my life. But when I talk to people and I start mentioning all these other pieces, like, oh yeah, I'm a professor. Oh yeah, I got my chef coat in 2012, or oh yeah, I travel. They're like, why don't you ever talk about this stuff? Or in a more negative way, if I get into a little back and forth with someone and I'll mention something about statistics, and they're like, what are you, an expert in that? I'm like, well, yeah, actually I am an expert in that. my dissertation was about psychology of athletes and identity, and they're like, oh, well, I didn't know. I'm like, yeah, so I once again, it's probably been 2 to 3 years of me thinking about like, okay, when should I start sharing more of myself, which is a little bit more vulnerable. Yeah, and I was like, you know what, I finally started talking to more people, and I was like, you know what, I'm gonna do it, start sharing more parts of myself, because I think that one, it forces me to be uncomfortable, which jiu-jitsu, right? So it forced me to not be in my comfort zone, but also I take value and it feeds my ego, when I think of it that way, when I am able to play a small role in the development of others or broadening the perspective of others. That fills my cup. You know what I mean? So the fact that I may be able to have a post not jiu-jitsu specific that maybe makes someone want to train jiu-jitsu, or I have a post that makes them want to take their professional life more serious, or may get them motivated to start reading, or whatever it may be. I was like, all right, let me actually dive into it and double down on it. So, and be consistent with it being the biggest thing. So that's why I started like, all right, let's do this. So
what's your daily, walk me through your day. Like, I love talking to people about their kind of daily routine. Like, how have you introduced the consistency on content into it? Is it something that you have, I'm going to do it every day at 10 a.m. or is it like, oh no, I got to make content?
Yeah, no. So I probably should have, actually, I won't say I should have a schedule, because that's just maybe not how, what consistency would look like for me. But in regards to the social media piece, I go about my day and how my brain works. I naturally just wander and have these ideas that pop up in my head. And albeit a book that I'm reading, or a thought that just pops in my head that I convert into a Twitter post, or a jiu-jitsu talk / mat chat that I had earlier in class, or that I'm thinking about going into class, I'll just make sure I actually post it. Right? Because my challenge, if anything, and I think I actually made a quick story about it, is I have so many thoughts. The challenge for me is just grabbing one and then putting it out there. right? So that's where I'd find myself, where I'll just constantly have these thoughts. And I'm like, oh, I should post that one. I should record that one. I should share a story about that one. And then it would just never happen. So now I'm just forcing myself, because once again, I definitely don't have any shortness of content in my brain. It's just a matter of catching it and then putting it out there. So that's been more so the consistent thing of making sure I actually just execute.
We're very, very similar, in this whole context. That's probably why we like talking last time and keep in touch. But I was thinking about that exact thing last week, and I wrote a poem about it, believe it or not. I've been writing poetry. I know that might sound weird to some people, but I've been writing a lot of poetry lately. And I wrote a poem about that exact topic, about that. And I'm going to give you my little cheat code on this in a second.
Yeah.
But I have all of these ideas. I'll be in my car. I'll be jogging. I'll be on the Peloton. I'll be doing Jiu Jitsu. Something will pop into my head and I'll be like, oh shit, that's great. That's good stuff. And then I'll go sit down to want to put it down to paper or write. And I'll be like, oh, what was I thinking about?
Yep.
But I always carry around this journal with me. I've been jotting down notes as we've been talking. And I always, I have, this is number 23. I number all of them. So let's just see on the volume awesome. 23. And I have a very, very, very good method for how to accomplish my work. I use the dot matrix system, but sometimes I just jot down the little things. And what the poem I wrote was about, I'll send it to you offline. I don't know if I'm ready to publish this yet, but it was about how impactful Chat GPT and AI has been in my life, because I've been able to take basically the bullet point versions of things in my life and have it transcribe it perfectly, beautifully, poetically. And so it's allowed me to write poetry and music and books. And I've just been polishing off all of these ideas. And that's what the poem is about. The poem is about the relationship between humans and AI. It's very poetic. It doesn't say it that way, but I'll send it to you offline. You'll let me know what you think. You are a professor after all.
But yeah, no, and that's truly, and I'm very open, as I talk more so in regards to my, I guess, professional side. I'm very open with all the staff I supervise of here's my weakness. It's I'll throw out ideas and please don't take all of them seriously. Because some of them are literally just pop up in my head and some of them are absolute gold, but other ones are literally, that's just where my brain went. But feel free, if it is something we want to put energy towards, to lock me down and be like, hey, we actually want to take action towards it. Because then I'll be able to, once again, come up with a plan, system, and all the logistics behind it. But it's getting me down and then getting me to finalize the final piece. But the brainstorming and then coming up with the system to make it all work, I got you. But hey, we're going to actually go ahead, and then the final execution, that's where I need a number one or a number two to get me on that. But yeah, no, and I love the journal. I really enjoy writing out what I think, because I'm surprised by it, because of the fact that, as you just said, I'll completely forget. So I think by doing journaling, I'll literally be reading it and it almost seem as though someone else wrote it, because I'm like, wow, I forgot I had that thought.
Yes, it happens to me all the time.
Oh, that's
very, very good. So you mentioned, working with your staff. You've pursued advanced degrees, both your master's and your doctorate. You're putting that to good use now, and you're working with teams. What are some of the things from your education that you've taken over to your profession now? As working with students as either a professor or as a leader, someone who's leading teams. What kind of things are you working on?
Yeah, so and you actually, it's kind of a highlight or something I'm always drawn to in that kind of statement of my bio, if you will. And I forget exactly how that part was phrased. They quoted me from something, but the value of research not just being in the publication of it, but in the actual application, right? Because it's very easy in the academic world to just publish research for the sake of publishing research, right? But when I was being interviewed here from the side of academics, I even told them that. I was like, just so you know, if you're looking for someone to just publish research and not work with students, I'm probably not your guy, right? Because you can literally become a professor and teach maybe one class a year, right?
Wow.
That's heavily valued if you're able to do research, bring funding to the school, but also bring notoriety to the school. So I was like,
Mm.
just so you know, if that's what you're looking for. I'm not going to be that guy. I will produce research. I will be presenting at conferences and stuff along those lines, workshops, doing consulting work. But I want to know that there are consequences to the research I put out. You know what I mean? So
Mhm.
I talk about this thing of like consequential knowledge. Like I like having a high consequence to my lack of knowledge or my actual knowledge I have, right? So in jiu-jitsu, if you have a professor or coach who does not know the actual art, the consequence to their lack of knowledge is their students may get seriously injured,
Mm.
right? So jiu-jitsu is a sport where as a professor, as a teacher, as a coach, you have a high level of consequential knowledge, right? So for me, the same thing applies for theories and all these other types of concepts of, great, if I do a paper, but I want to know that the words in that paper, if someone were to apply it, they will get positive results, right? And so that's a big thing for me. So that's probably the biggest thing that I took from doing my work, or from doing my research rather, is I want to produce work that if a student, if a professional were to read it and try to apply it to their life, apply it to their team, apply it to um, their athletes, they will find success.
Mm.
Because what oftentimes happens is, albeit politically or what have you, we will hear research studies and then we then try to apply it into the real world and they fall apart, right?
Mm.
So that's a big thing for me is I don't want to just be a researcher or a professor. I want to know that what I tell you is going to actually work in the real world.
Yeah. We spoke about last time, I think, the book Thinking Fast and Slow, the influence on us both, and the work of Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky,
Yep.
to incredible economists and thinkers.
Yep. Noble
Is
laureate.
this the kind of career that you want to have too, where you have this kind of impact? Have you thought about writing a book?
Yes, I have thought about writing a book. Is it being written? Maybe. It has. Yes. So yeah, 100%. I'll say I will write a book. Similar to years ago when I said I will become Dr. Garcia before this age. I will get my black. Yeah, I will 100% write a book. Probably multiple books if that.
I hope so. I hope so. What kind of things what kind of areas you want to focus on?
So definitely sports. I love there's a quote of sport is a microcosm of life, right? So what you see in life, you can oftentimes see in sport. So I really like the idea of like really diving into that and kind of bring it down. And I don't mean that in a negative way, but just bring it down where everyone feels like, oh yes, that I feel that, I see that, I'm a part of that. Because it is so ingrained into. I always used to say like whether you love sports or despise sports, it will impact your life.
Oh yeah.
Even
This
if you
is
go, I've never played a sport, I've never touched the ball, it will impact your life, right? If you're living in a major city, well, there you go. You likely have a professional team that will impact the property taxes. It'll impact the amount of hotels you have in your area, right? It will have an impact on your life, whether you love sports or don't love sports. So I'd love to touch on that piece. I'd love to do something specifically for athletes and dealing with retirement / the ending of their sport identity, because that's what my research was specifically on. I'd love to do one at some point about relationships as I make a huge swing there.
Yeah, no.
Leadership. Yeah, there's a handful of topics, but definitely sport focused, but then definitely leadership is
Yeah.
another big one. And then relationships.
I love both of those topics. And I pulled up a quote over here. This is from my own real estate website. We own, my family, my father and I, in partnership, 5 golf courses. My dad loves golf. I like golf. Jiu-jitsu is my love. Golf is his love, but these have been fantastic investments. But I added this page to our website for him, and it says, for those of you who are listening and not watching, golf is the closest game to the game we call life. You get bad breaks from good shots. You get good breaks from bad shots, but you have to play the ball where it lies. And it's a great quote. It's universal in jiu-jitsu too. Same thing.
Yeah.
You do a technique perfectly, it gets shut down. You do a technique sloppily, and all of a sudden you're on the choke. So it's just a beautiful, beautiful thing.
Yeah, I think it was Brandon McCarron out of or BMAC out of Temple Decatur, Alabama. I saw him talking to his students, and he said something along the lines of like, if you compete enough times, he thinks it's important for you to experience all these, which is preparing the best you can and then going out there and losing, preparing the best you can, going out there and winning, and then also not preparing the best you can and going out there and winning, and also preparing not as best as you can and going out there and losing. Because those all are very different. Once again, it's great when you work hard and get the outcome you wanted, but also part of life is working really hard and not getting the outcome you were hoping for.
Yes.
Right. And so sometimes you won't work that hard and things will work out. Also times you won't work hard and things will work out. So it's that kind of things that are within our control, outside of our control type aspects of life that everyone should come to peace with and learn to feel comfortable navigating, like with Jiu Jitsu.
It's one of the most important things to learn, and one of the hardest to internalize and hardest to teach, because as I often tell my team, we could execute perfectly and then COVID hits. There's nothing you could do. Government sends you home, go back to your house, shut down all your stores. There's nothing you could do. And we could have a crappy week, and it's just, there's just nothing that sometimes you just have to keep doing your best no matter what. And you just like the quote said, and like you just said, perfect. And I want to just go back to one thing you said before. And I want to give my dad a shout out on this. In 2005, in 2003, my dad started selling his family business, which was the home healthcare. My grandfather started that business in 1955. My dad ended up selling it in 2003. When my dad was selling that business, it ended up taking 2 years to sell. And in that time is when he started the website I just showed, Chart Organization, which is our family's commercial real estate and investment business. And his thinking on that was he didn't even want to take a single day off. He wasn't retiring. He was just pivoting in his career from home healthcare to, at the time, commercial real estate, and now investing across a whole spectrum of investments. But in 2003, he went out and got a new office. He built a small staff. He went from having 7,000 employees to having 2 employees at his commercial real estate business. But he said the day that he was done, that he closed one door in his life, the other one was already open and started.
Yep.
And I'm interested to know about your work on it and where your research has brought you, because I remember speaking to Nick Koumoulatos on this podcast, and he wrote about this in his book and his journey. And I'm not sure if you know who Nick is, but he's a Brazilian Jiu Jitsu practitioner. I think he's either a blue belt or a purple belt now, but he was a Marine Raider, MARSOC, Marine Special Operations Command. And he was suicidal when he left the Marines because they made every decision for him. He didn't know what to do. And when he left, he thought that there would be some path, but it was nothing. Go. It was just bye.
Yep.
And so I'm very interested. What are some of your high level thoughts on, making this transition in sports?
Yeah. So that's literally like a big crux of my research, which is essentially people face like an identity crisis, right? And so we know athletes oftentimes face it, but once again, very common in military. But even for a more common one, like, and I'm going to say mothers, just because they tend to be the caregivers more often, mothers will oftentimes face it when they're empty nesters, right? So when you're assuming a role for an extended period of time, right, and you can go through one of 2 different types of transitions out of that role. One's considered a normative, normal, but a normative transition or a non-normative, right? So looking at athletes, right, let's take your traditional NFL career. So let's say I started playing football at the age of 5 years old, right? And I make it all the way to playing at the college level. And let's say I even do all 4 years of college. And then I get drafted and I have a really long career, which is about 5 years, right? But you know what? Let's say I have an extraordinary career. I have a 10-year career. I'm 31 years old. So from the time I was 5 years old to 31, so 26 years, I have been football. My friends have been football. My social circles have likely been football if I have not been working on these other areas of my life, right? Yeah. So then when I'm done, once again, if I have not been working on these other areas of life, who am I now? Right? Who am I now? Right? So where the normative and non-normative comes in is if you choose to retire, so I go, you know what, I'm hanging up, you can start planning those next steps oftentimes, right? Compared to the player who once again gets drafted and then a year later they get cut from their team and no other team wants to pick them up, right? So if you get injured, that ends your career, or you get cut and no one picks you up, that's considered a non-normative, a not normal or non-normative transition. So people who have those non-normative transitions tend to struggle even more, right? So once again, we can see that in the military. If you get injured, right, and you're not able to return to service, right, that's where you'll see oftentimes an unfortunate dark spiral, because like I didn't even get to choose my ending, right? It just ended. I wasn't even able to prepare and start setting these things up in place, right? So one, that's why a big part of my research is trying to work with coaches. I'm literally going to be in Alabama next month doing a workshop with United States coaches to set up systems so that their athletes are developing as holistically as possible, still focused on the game, because as a coach, you need them to win, but developing as holistically as possible so that whether they get injured, which is outside of all of our control, or they choose to retire, they know that their identity isn't just tied to this one thing, it's also tied to all other aspects of their life. So yeah, that's a very common thing, a very unfortunate thing, but a very common thing. And it's due to, once again, all of our identity being tied into that structure. Or once again, if you think military, those are the people I live, sleep, and eat with and protect, and they protect me. And then I go back into the civilian world and those people aren't there anymore, right? And I'm expected to just go about my day without that structure, without those people right by my side. And it's like, well, once again, who am I? So yeah, so it's a very common thing, but once again, we see it not only in athletes, military, but even, once again, parents or anyone that holds one specific role for an extended period of time.
It's really important work that you're doing, and exciting work. I'm so interested in it, because when you were saying research, I didn't really, fully appreciate it. So I'm glad that we went past it a little bit to understand what some of that research is. And it's such a relevant field today, where sport is so widespread and it's such a big part of people's lives. And I think becoming an even bigger part of people's lives as people continue to train and look at the explosion of Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. The mean age is probably in the 30s. People are continuing to pick up new sports like cycling and running, and after they finish team sports, So, but I have a deeply personal story that just happened recently on the subject of injury. And through COVID, I was under an immense amount of stress, trying to keep my businesses alive. Everybody in the world was under the same kind of stress, but I was feeling it. And I would go on these walks with my wife in the morning, and I'd say, I feel like crying. I'm so emotional. I want a release. I was like, why can't I cry? I was like, I can't, I feel like I want to cry because I'm so stressed, but I just couldn't. And I really only had cried a few times at like a funeral here or there. My grandma passed, and it was like tears, but I hadn't had like a good cry.
Yep.
So now fast forward 3 years. This was about 6 weeks ago. And I was at Jiu Jitsu one night. And the past year has been tough for me on Jiu Jitsu. I blew out my LCL and PCL last May, so a year and change ago.
Yep.
And I just never got back to where I was, but I'd been struggling to train. And then 6 weeks ago, I was in the omoplata and I went shoulder first, and I exploded my shoulder. It separated and I tore my labrum. And when I hit the ground, I was like in shock. I got into my car and everything came out. Pouring out. I couldn't, uncontrollable sobbing, hysterical crying. And the feeling was, am I ever going to be able to do jiu-jitsu at the level that I was at a year ago again? That was what I was saying to myself. You've put everything into this sport. It's been 13 years. You're a brown belt. You're done. You've been working towards this black belt. Is this it? Are you not going to be able to get a black belt now? And I couldn't stop the crying. And so when you're talking about your research and the idea of getting injured, I've lived it. Yeah. And I just want to give a little bit of a happy story to anybody who's listening to this for a little inspiration. I never fully recovered off of my LCL, PCL in that year. I stopped PT too soon. I went right back to jiu-jitsu, and it was a string of injury. I hurt my other knee. I hurt my shoulder. I never got back to it. I wasn't cross training. So when my shoulder exploded, it literally exploded. It caused me to stop. It caused me to get back into PT. Yep. And now I've done 65 days of Peloton zone training, FTP zone training, functional threshold power training on the Peloton bike. And I have transformed, my cardiovascular system. like technically from the data.
Yeah.
I started training light last week in Jiu Jitsu, and I could not believe the progress I had made not doing Jiu Jitsu. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I'm just like, I wanted to tell that story for anybody who's listening, who has gone through a really, really hard time or a transition in their life due to injury, that you can absolutely come back from it and redesign how you think about your life and your sport. But
Yeah, well, and there's definitely a balance. I think depending on which social circles you're in, you can hear different narratives about like the kind of anti hustle culture, right? That's the anti hustle or anti like burnout culture. But there's like a balance to it. You know what I mean? Like some people 100% should bring it back because actually they're stifling their development by not taking breaks, right? So it's like those who are like, well, I don't need to sleep. Well, there's a very small population of people that can actually go with 3 to 4 hours of sleep without actually seeing any type of negative consequences. So it's like we need sleep, but also we need breaks to be able to better process and also maybe even come in with a new style or game plan or outlook, right? So you may be, by continuously training and not taking a break or not allowing injuries to heal it properly, you may be creating a wall to your development and to your growth.
yes.
You know what I mean? And what seems kind of counterintuitive, like, no, just do more jiu-jitsu. That's how you get better, just doing more. And it's like, yes, yes. But also knowing when to take the break, when to kind of sit back, will allow you to have maybe a better vision. It's like looking up too close to something, right?
Yes.
Why stand back, you see the bigger picture and go, oh, that door was open the whole time? Oh, why haven't I just gone around? And that's how I now get over why you can't pass shield guard or whatever the game may be.
Yeah. Well, what a pleasure it is to reconnect with you again. I'm positive we're going to do this many more times as you develop your research and get, gain new perspective, and really, really grateful for your friendship and the friendships of the podcast. And we have to get together this summer, get a little training, get a little dinner, get a little wine, as you mentioned. I want to share my screen on where everyone can find you. You are at Garcia Grip on Life on Instagram. I know you mentioned that you're not keeping it fully active right now, but you also have _ Jiu-Jitsu Talks _, and there's some great content back there. You post some really profound things. You have a great perspective on life, on sport, on relationships. So I encourage everybody to follow along. And thank you for all that you do. I really, really mean that from the bottom of my heart. I'm going to send you this poem that we had a similar thought.
Oh, for sure.
When this is over. And if I could be of service to you in any way, you know where to reach me.
Awesome. Really, really appreciate you. And yeah, we'll definitely do this many more times. And if you're ever in the New England area, like definitely make sure you hit me up. But we'll connect soon.
I absolutely will. Have a great day, and we'll talk soon. Bye-bye.